Life doesn't always reward loyalty. Sometimes the one who lies, cheats, and betrays walks away smiling, at least for a while. But truth has a way of catching up. This story is about patience, courage, and standing your ground when everything is taken from you. Because in the end, it's not about revenge, it's about justice, self-respect, and taking your life back on your own terms.
The house was plunged into darkness, the porch light intentionally switched off. On the coffee table, his wife's wedding band lay next to a single piece of paper. It held only 5 words, but they were powerful enough to shatter his entire world. Do not come looking for us. While he was celebrating Christmas Eve in Aspen with another woman, his wife had discovered every one of his secrets. She found the hidden bank accounts, the secret apartment, and the other woman he had promised a future to. He never suspected a thing. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she took their 8-month-old twins and simply disappeared into the night. What she does next will absolutely stun you. If you're a firm believer that karma is real and that people always get what they deserve, then you need to subscribe and follow this story until the very end. You will be very happy you did. The nursery felt cold and painfully empty. Meredith Caldwell stood in the doorway, clutching 2 small Christmas stockings decorated with tiny snowflakes and reindeer. Her fingers traced the names, Emmett and Nora, which were stitched in elegant silver thread. "My sweet babies," she whispered into the silent room, her voice shaking. "He did not just ruin Christmas. He ruined everything. And I never saw it coming." But that moment of terrible realization would not come until much later. Our story really starts on the morning of Christmas Eve, at a time when Meredith was completely convinced her life was perfect. The Caldwell family home in Greenwich, Connecticut, looked like it belonged in a magazine. A fresh layer of snow covered the perfectly kept lawn. A wreath with a velvet ribbon hung in every window, in the precise shade of red that her mother-in-law, Eleanor, demanded every single year. Inside, a huge 12-foot Christmas tree towered over the living room, glittering with lights and ornaments that had been in the Caldwell family for 3 generations. Meredith had been up since 5 in the morning. Now that the twins were finally sleeping through the night, she was using the quiet time to get ready for the holiday. She baked gingerbread cookies from scratch and wrapped every gift in fancy paper with perfect bows. She even laid out matching pajamas for the family Christmas picture they planned to take later that evening. Everything had to be perfect, just like always. She was on a stepladder, making one last adjustment to the angel on the treetop, when she felt his presence behind her. Garrett was standing in the doorway, already dressed in a pricey charcoal gray suit. His travel bag was packed and sitting by the front door. He looked handsome and professional, as he always did. "Are you leaving already?" Meredith asked, climbing down carefully. "I did not think your flight was until noon." He walked toward her and gave her a quick, almost formal kiss on her forehead, avoiding her lips. She felt the sting of his coldness, but decided to ignore it. "I am going to drive instead," he said in a casual voice. "The weather forecast said the snow could get bad later. It is just smarter to leave now." She simply nodded, but a strange, uneasy feeling started to twist in her stomach. Garrett was a man of habit. He almost never changed his plans. She knew that after 6 years of marriage. "Are you certain the clients could not postpone the meeting?" she asked, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. "It is the twins' first Christmas, Garrett." "They will not remember it, but I will," he answered with a deep sigh. It was the sigh of a man who was sick of having the same argument. "Meredith, we talked about this. The Henderson deal is worth $40 million. If I close this deal, our future will be set. I promise I will be home on Christmas night." She had a strong desire to fight back. She wanted to remind him that she had given up her own successful career for him, that she had spent the last year in a blur of exhaustion from sleepless nights. All she wanted was for him to be there with her and their children. But Meredith Caldwell was not the kind of woman who started fights. She was the one who always smoothed things over and made life easier for everyone else. "Okay," she said, managing a weak smile. "Just please drive safely." Garrett gave her that charming smile that had won her over at a charity event 7 years ago. He held her face in his hands and looked into her eyes with what she thought was real love. "I will definitely make it up to you," he promised. "We will spend New Year's in Turks and Caicos, just the four of us. I have already arranged everything." She forced herself to smile back, letting his promise calm her rising anxiety. "It is fine. Go close your deal." He grabbed his car keys from a small table by the front door. At that exact moment, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, quickly turned it away from her, and sent a short reply. "That is the client now," he said smoothly. "I need to take this call from the car." She watched him walk away, hugging her arms to fight off a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Garrett," she called out just as he got to the door. He stopped and looked back at her. "I love you." A peculiar look flickered across his face for a split second. It could have been guilt, or maybe it was just annoyance. "Love you too," he said, and then he was gone. For a long time, Meredith just stood there in the hall. She listened to the sound of his car tires crunching on the gravel driveway until the sound disappeared. The house suddenly felt vast and empty, even with the twins sleeping peacefully upstairs. She went back to the living room and straightened a Christmas ornament that was already hanging perfectly. In the faint reflection of the window, she saw the face of a tired woman who looked much older than her 32 years. When did that happen? Just then, she heard Nora start to cry from the nursery, which snapped Meredith out of her thoughts. She hurried upstairs, thankful for the interruption. In the nursery, both babies were now wide awake. Their little faces were wrinkled up, a clear sign that they were ready to eat. She picked up Nora first, and then Emmett, and held them both tightly against her, just as she had done 1,000 times. "Good morning, my little loves," she whispered. "Daddy had to go to work, but it is okay. We are going to have the best Christmas ever, just the three of us." She tried to make her voice sound cheerful and happy, but it just came out sounding weak. As she sat in the rocking chair to feed them, her gaze fell on a family picture on the dresser. It was from their wedding day. Garrett looked like the luckiest man in the world, and Meredith looked like she had hit the jackpot. She truly thought she had. Her phone buzzed on the small table next to her. She picked it up with her free hand, expecting a text message from Garrett, but it was from Suzanne, her best friend. The message said, "Merry Christmas Eve. How are my two favorite babies doing?" Meredith typed a reply, "They are perfect. Garrett had to fly to Aspen for a last-minute work trip." She watched the three little dots appear and disappear while Suzanne wrote back. A few seconds later, a new message popped up. It simply asked, "Aspen for work? In December?" Something about that simple question made Meredith's stomach tighten. She quickly wrote back, "Yes, it is a very big client meeting. You know how his job is." Suzanne's reply was almost instant. "Of course. Call me when you have a minute." Meredith put her phone down and tried to focus on her babies. They were eating quietly, their tiny fists opening and closing. She breathed in their sweet, milky smell and tried to ignore the deeply unsettling feeling that was growing inside her. "It is Christmas Eve," she told herself. "My husband loves me. Everything is fine." She repeated those words again and again, like a chant. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. But deep down inside, a small part of her already knew that it was not. Christmas Eve arrived with a soft snowfall that made the world outside feel quiet. The house seemed huge and empty without Garrett there. Every little creak and groan of the old house seemed to echo in the silence. Meredith had put the twins to bed an hour ago, singing Silent Night until her voice was scratchy. Now she was all alone in the living room. A glass of red wine sat on the coffee table, untouched. The twinkling lights from the Christmas tree cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. She had tried to call Garrett 2 times, but both calls went straight to voicemail. She kept telling herself that he was probably stuck in a long dinner meeting. She told herself he would call as soon as he could. She kept inventing these little excuses to keep the rising panic from overwhelming her. Her laptop was on the footstool where she had left it. The screen was still open to the software she was using to edit their family Christmas card. Now, she picked it up for a completely different reason. She wanted to upload some new pictures of the twins playing in their first snow to their shared family cloud account. Garrett's mother had been asking to see them. It was a simple, ordinary task, just something to keep her hands busy while her mind was racing. Meredith flipped open her laptop, heading for the family's shared drive. But what she saw on the screen made her blood run cold. Garrett's personal email was still active from the last time he'd used her computer. His private inbox was right there, showing a list of unread messages in bold red letters. Meredith hesitated. In all their years of marriage, she had never once snooped through his private emails. She truly believed their connection was built on a foundation of absolute trust. The words of her friend echoed in her mind. A business trip to Aspen, the week of Christmas? With a shaking hand, Meredith moved the mouse and clicked open his email. The first thing she saw was a hotel confirmation for a 5-star resort in Aspen. Her heart started hammering in her chest as she opened the file. The booking was for a romantic winter getaway package for 2 people. The check-in was set for December 24th, with a checkout on December 26th. The reservation was in the name of Garrett Caldwell. The second guest was listed as Vanessa Holt. Have you ever stumbled upon a secret that completely destroyed your world? If you know what that feels like, please type the word story in the comments. The words on the screen began to blur. Meredith blinked, sure that her eyes were playing tricks on her. She scrolled down and found email after email, a long conversation that went back for months. There were reservations for romantic dinners for 2. She found online receipts for expensive jewelry from stores she had never heard of. After that, she found a rental contract for an apartment in the city that he had signed 6 months ago. Her hands began to tremble so hard that the laptop almost fell off her lap. She placed it gently on the table, put her face in her hands, and struggled to breathe, trying to process what was happening. It had to be a terrible mistake. Garrett would not do this to her. He loved her, but her fingers seemed to move on their own. She opened a new browser tab and typed a name, Vanessa Holt. The very first search result was a professional social media profile. Vanessa Holt was an executive assistant to Garrett Caldwell. Her profile picture showed a self-assured woman with a brilliant smile. She looked to be in her late 20s and had beautiful dark hair. Meredith felt sick to her stomach as she clicked on the woman's public Instagram account. The latest post was from just a few hours earlier. It was a photo of a champagne glass held up in front of a snowy mountain backdrop. The caption said, "Some presents are worth waiting for," and it was followed by a diamond ring emoji. Meredith zoomed in on the picture. A stunning gold bracelet was wrapped around the woman's wrist. Meredith recognized it instantly. 6 months earlier, she had pointed to that very same bracelet in a jewelry store display. Garrett had claimed it was far too expensive, and now it was right there on the arm of a different woman. The evidence was undeniable in the photograph. Meredith completely forgot about the wine she had poured for herself. She went deeper and deeper into the proof of her husband's secret world. She discovered statements for a credit card he had hidden from her. She found text messages that he had saved to his email. The talks were so intimate that she felt ill just reading them. One message from 3 weeks ago sent a shiver down her spine. He had sent it the day before Thanksgiving. A woman named Vanessa had written, "When are you going to tell her it is over?" Garrett's response was painfully clear. "After the holidays. I need to get my finances in order first. She has no idea. Meredith read his words over and over until they didn't even look like real words anymore. She has no idea. The web of lies was so vast that it felt like it was blocking out all the light in her life. The secret apartment and the other woman were all horribly real. With trembling hands, she called Garrett's phone. He picked up on the third ring, his voice sounding annoyed and hurried. "What's wrong? I'm in the middle of a major meeting." She could hear music and people laughing in the background. She could also make out a woman's voice, but she could not tell what she was saying. "Garrett, who is with you?" Meredith asked, her own voice barely audible. "I am here with my team," he said sharply. "Mary, stop being so insecure. I will call you tomorrow." Meredith kept pushing. "Garrett, I really need to speak with you." He let out a loud, irritated sigh. "Whatever you have to say can wait. I am talking to very important clients." "More important than your wife?" she wanted to yell. "More important than your children." But the words were caught in her throat. She heard the woman laugh again, and this time it sounded much nearer to his phone. In that single moment, something inside Meredith completely shattered. "Look, I need to go," Garrett said. "Merry Christmas." And with that, he hung up. Meredith just sat there in the crushing silence for what felt like hours. The cheerful lights on the Christmas tree blinked on and off. They had no idea that a family was being torn apart right beside them. Then she slowly got to her feet. She went upstairs and into the nursery. The twins were fast asleep in their cribs, their little faces peaceful, and without a care in the world. Meredith slid to the floor between their beds and pulled her knees up to her chest. That is when she started to cry. The tears were silent, but they flowed endlessly. She cried until her whole body hurt, until she felt completely empty. She cried for the life she thought she had, and for the man she thought she knew. She cried for the future she had always imagined, which was now melting away like a snowflake on a warm stove. When the tears finally stopped, a different feeling replaced the sadness. It was not rage. It was a feeling of pure, cold purpose. She grabbed her phone and dialed her friend Suzanne, who picked up on the very first ring. "Mary, what is going on?" Meredith's voice was surprisingly firm, much stronger than she felt. "I need your help. Garrett has been lying. He has been lying about every single thing." Suzanne pulled up to the Grenache Chateau just as the sun was starting to rise on Christmas morning. Her car was loaded with supplies. Her mind, as sharp as a lawyer's, was already working through all the angles. Neither of them had gotten any sleep. They sat at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones, while the twins slept soundly upstairs. As the gentle Christmas morning light filled the kitchen, Suzanne was focused and serious. "Show me everything you found." Meredith pushed her laptop toward her. She had spent the whole night downloading documents, taking pictures of the screen, and making a complete file of her husband's betrayal. This was not the Christmas she had imagined, but it was going to be the Christmas that set her free. Suzanne reviewed the evidence without a word. Her face grew darker and more serious with every file she opened. There was the apartment rental agreement and the receipts for lavish gifts. The text messages revealed a clear plan for a new beginning, a life that did not involve Meredith. Finally, Suzanne looked up from the screen. "This is bad, Mary. This is incredibly bad." "I know," Meredith whispered. "No," Suzanne said firmly. "You don't understand. These bank records show he's hiding money from you, a very large amount of money. If he is doing what I suspect, you have to act immediately." Meredith's grip tightened on her now cold coffee mug. "What do you mean?" Suzanne leaned closer. "Men like Garrett don't just walk away. They create an escape plan. They make sure they walk away with everything. By the time the wife figures it out, every dollar is gone. The prenuptial agreement is solid, and she gets left with absolutely nothing." Meredith said quietly, "We never signed a prenuptial agreement. He told me he trusted me too much for that." Suzanne laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Of course he did. He knew exactly what he was doing. A prenup would have given you some basic security. Without one, he can attempt to take every single cent in the divorce. But it also means you are entitled to half of everything, but only if you can prove it exists. Meredith could only look at the pile of evidence on her screen. So what should I do? Suzanne had an immediate answer. You need to leave. Today. Right this minute. Before he gets home and finds out you know. Leave? But where would I even go? Meredith asked, her voice shaking. My family owns a cabin in Vermont. It has not been used for years. There is no paperwork that connects you to it, and no one outside our family even knows it exists. Meredith slowly shook her head. I cannot just take the twins and disappear. That would be kidnapping. It is not kidnapping when you are their mother, and there is no custody agreement from a court. You have the full legal right to take your children anywhere you want. What you do not have, Suzanne said with urgency, is time. Her words hung in the quiet room. Meredith gazed around the beautiful kitchen, a space she had designed from scratch. She looked at the custom wood cabinets. She looked at the marble countertops and the professional-style oven. She had poured her entire soul into making this house a true home, only to discover it had never really been hers at all. If I go, she said softly, everything changes. I can never return to this house. Suzanne reached out and held her hand. Do you really want to return? Do you want to be with a man who lied to you every day for months? A man who has another woman living in an apartment that you helped pay for without even knowing it? Meredith pictured Garrett's face in her mind. She thought about the champagne and the bracelet. She remembered how angry he had sounded on the phone. He spoke to her like she was a mess that needed cleaning up, an annoying task on his to-do list. No, she whispered to herself, the decision finally settling in her heart. I am not coming back. Her friend Suzanne was already there, ready to help. Good. Then let's get moving, Suzanne said. They worked fast, with a purpose. Meredith packed only what was absolutely necessary, following a careful list Suzanne had made. She gathered birth certificates, passports, and social security cards. She took the health records for the twins. The only personal item she packed was her grandmother's jewelry, the one thing that felt like it truly belonged to her. She left every piece of her own clothing and all the smiling family photos behind. She was taking only what she needed to start over. Suzanne managed all the details. She had Meredith stop at an ATM to withdraw a large amount of cash from a personal account Garrett knew nothing about. The money came from a bank account that her husband had never even noticed. At a small, quiet gas station, she purchased a disposable phone that could not be traced back to her. Suzanne had already planned a new future for them, creating a route that used winding country roads, making them almost impossible to follow. After the last bag was in the car, Meredith stood for a moment in the doorway of her living room. The Christmas tree was still glowing, its little lights blinking in a cheerful, endless rhythm. Over the fireplace, their stockings were hung, waiting to be filled. The presents she had wrapped so perfectly sat in a bright, festive pile. She walked to the coffee table and slowly, deliberately, slid her wedding band off her finger. She placed the simple gold ring right on the dark wood. Next, she tore a page from a notepad and wrote just 6 simple words. Do not try to find us. She left the note right next to her ring. Without a single glance back, she walked out of the room. In the car, she gently buckled her sleepy twins into their seats. As she tightened the harness, Emmett reached out with his little hand and playfully grabbed her finger. Nora let out a tiny yawn and fell back asleep. Meredith leaned over and gave each of them a soft kiss on the forehead. We are going on an adventure, she whispered. From now on, it will be just the 3 of us. She got into the driver's seat and looked over at Suzanne. Are you sure about this cabin? Suzanne gave her a confident nod. I am sending the location to your new phone right now, Suzanne said. Get rid of your old one. Do not call anyone from your past life. I will take care of everything here. Meredith nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. Thank you for making this possible." "You can thank me later," Suzanne replied, "when you are finally safe and completely free." Meredith turned the key, and the car's engine came to life with a quiet rumble. She took one final look at the house she had called home for the last 4 years. It was a perfect house for a perfect life, but she now knew that it had all been a beautiful, heartbreaking lie. She put the car in drive and drove off into the gray light of Christmas morning. She was leaving everything she had ever known, except for the two small children who were her entire world. As she pulled away, a fresh blanket of snow began to fall from the sky. It quickly covered her tire tracks, hiding any proof that she was ever there. Garrett Caldwell arrived home on Christmas evening to a house that was completely dark. The first thing he noticed was the porch light was off. Meredith always left it on for him. It was one of her little habits, a small, kind gesture that he took for granted. But tonight, the entrance was dark and cold. A feeling of dread started to creep in as he pulled into the driveway. His private flight from Aspen had been rough. The winter storm had tossed the small jet around in the air. During the flight, Garrett had been nursing a headache from too much champagne and thinking about his weekend. Vanessa had been upset that he had to leave so soon. She had pleaded with him to stay until the new year. But keeping up appearances was very important. Garrett Caldwell was a man who cared deeply about how things looked to the world. He used his key, opened the front door, and stepped into the darkness. In the living room, the Christmas tree was still lit. Its colorful lights threw dancing shadows across the walls of the silent house. "Meredith," he called out, "I am home." But the only answer he received was the deep, unsettling silence. He dropped his travel bag by the door and walked deeper into the living room. At first, everything looked normal. The holiday decorations were perfectly placed, the gifts were stacked neatly under the tree, and the sofa cushions were perfectly arranged. Then, his eyes landed on the coffee table. Her wedding band was sitting there next to a folded piece of paper. It sparkled under the blinking lights of the tree. Garrett's hands started to shake as he reached for the note. "Do not try to find us." He read the words again and again, but they did not seem real. The paper fell from his hand as he ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time. The nursery was empty. The two cribs stood there like silent judgments. The blankets on the little beds were folded neatly, but the babies who were supposed to be sleeping there were gone. Garrett pulled open the dresser drawers. They were only half full of tiny clothes. The diaper bag was gone. The baby carriers were missing too. He grabbed his phone and called Meredith. It rang once and went straight to her voicemail. He tried again with the same result. His hand was trembling as he scrolled through his contacts, searching for his mother's number. Eleanor answered on the second ring, her voice clear and sharp even though it was late. "Garrett, what is wrong?" He could barely speak. "She is gone." "Meredith," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "She took the twins, and she is gone." There was a brief silence on the other end, and then Eleanor's voice turned as cold as ice. "What do you mean she is gone?" "I came home, and the house was empty. She left her wedding ring on the table. There was a note telling me not to look for her. The babies are gone." "I see," Eleanor said, her voice like a winter wind. "Garrett, what did you do?" "I did not do anything. I do not know why she would just leave like this." "Do not lie to me," she snapped. "I am not your naive little wife." Garrett fell onto the bed and put his face in his hands. He thought about the emails and the text messages, the proof he was so sure he had deleted. "She knows," he admitted in a quiet voice. "She found out about Vanessa." The silence on the other end of the phone was heavy and complete. When Eleanor finally spoke, her voice could have frozen water. "You are an incredible fool. I warned you about that woman. I had it all under control. Clearly you did not. Do you have any idea where Meredith could have gone?" Garrett's mind was a swirling mess of panic. Her parents were gone, and she did not have many friends. Suzanne Brennan had been her maid of honor, but he could not remember the last time Meredith had even mentioned her name. Maybe Suzanne, he suggested. They were good friends in college. Then you need to find this Suzanne and find out what she knows, his mother ordered. I will start making some calls. We need to handle this situation before it becomes a public embarrassment. Garrett nodded, even though his mother could not see him. A new feeling was starting to grow inside his chest. It was not guilt. It was not regret. It was a hot, blinding rage. How could she do this to him? How dare she take his children and run away before he could explain things, before he could smooth it all over? He had given her a perfect life, a beautiful home, a respected last name, and a world of luxury. And this is how she thanked him? "Mother," he said, his voice now cold and hard, "I want them found and brought back home. Do whatever it takes." Eleanor's response was quick and certain. "I have people who are very good at their jobs. We will take care of this." After hanging up the phone, Garrett sat alone in the quiet nursery. He was surrounded by toys and furniture for a family that no longer existed. Above Emmett's crib, a little mobile spun slowly, playing a soft, tinkling song that made his jaw tighten with anger. He picked up his phone to make another call. Vanessa answered, sounding a little breathless. "Darling, I did not think you would call until tomorrow." "Plans have changed," Garrett said in a flat voice. "She knows," Garrett stated simply. "She took the kids and left." There was a short pause on the line. "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" "You are not going to do anything," he told her. "You will stay out of this and let me handle my own family affairs. Is that understood?" "Yes, of course. Whatever you say." Garrett hung up without another word. He went back downstairs and poured himself a large glass of scotch. He drank it all in one long, burning swallow. Meredith actually thought she could get away from him. She thought she could take his children and just vanish, as if he were just some average man she could leave behind. She was making a huge mistake. Garrett Caldwell never lost. Garrett Caldwell was not a man who accepted defeat. Not in the boardroom, not in his life, and certainly not in his marriage. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number for a specialist, a man whose expertise was locating people who had vanished. "I require your assistance," Garrett stated coldly. "My wife and our children are gone. I need her found in the next 48 hours. A price was quoted on the other end. Garrett's response was instant. "Agreed. The cost is not an issue." He ended the call and his gaze fell upon the festive Christmas tree. The twinkling lights felt like a cruel joke, shining brightly on the wreckage of his perfect world. She would come to regret this decision. Everyone who crossed him always did. Leaving Garrett, Caldwell was something nobody ever did. Her refuge was a cabin in Vermont, hidden at the end of a long, unplowed dirt road. The driveway was impassable, buried under a massive drift of snow. This forced Meredith to leave her car about 150 feet down the road. She struggled through knee-deep snow, carrying each of her babies individually. Once they were all inside, her legs trembled with exhaustion, and the cold air burned in her chest. Yet, the small building was sturdy and warm. More than anything, it was a sanctuary. The cabin had belonged to Suzanne's family for 3 generations. It was a basic place, with no connection to the outside world, but it offered the essentials of running water and a fireplace that worked. The cabin's pantry was full, stocked with enough supplies for a long stay, but Meredith was too distracted to care. She carefully placed her twins on a worn, comfortable sofa, her new reality sinking in. Those initial 3 days passed in a fog. Her life became a nonstop routine of bottles, sleeplessness, and an exhaustion that clouded her mind. Every curtain remained drawn, every strange noise made her heart race, and she obsessively checked the door locks before daring to close her eyes. Then, a subtle change began to happen. On her 4th day there, a sliver of sunlight broke through a gap in the curtains. She awoke to the happy sound of her son, Emmett, laughing softly in his crib. Her daughter, Nora, was also awake, making cheerful little noises as she looked up at the wooden ceiling. Meredith lay still for a few seconds, absorbing the precious sounds of her babies. Here in the peaceful quiet of the cabin, she experienced something she had not felt in a very long time. It was a sense of calm. That afternoon, Suzanne arrived. Her car was packed with bags of food and a thick portfolio of documents. She stomped the snow off her feet on the porch, then wrapped Meredith in a warm, reassuring embrace without speaking. "You have more life in your eyes," Suzanne observed at last. "The haunted look is gone." "I think I am better," Meredith replied. "It is odd. I thought I would be a complete wreck after arriving." Suzanne placed a heavy stack of folders onto the kitchen table. "You have been crumbling for a long time, piece by piece," she stated softly. "You were just too busy trying to keep your world from collapsing to see it." With the babies sleeping, they took a seat and laid out the documents on the simple wood surface. Suzanne's efforts were immediately obvious. She had found records from hidden accounts, titles to unknown properties, and evidence of illegal money schemes that made his cheating seem minor. "For more than a year, he has been shifting funds into offshore accounts," Suzanne revealed. "He's funneling cash through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands," Suzanne continued. "These are investments you would never see. In a divorce, he would plead poverty, and a judge would leave you with almost nothing." Meredith was speechless, her eyes fixed on the figures in front of her. "What is the total amount we are looking at?" "We believe it is between $12 and $15 million, Suzanne answered, "and it is all completely off the books." The sum was unbelievable. Meredith had assumed they were well off, but this level of fortune was beyond her imagination. "There is more," Suzanne added, her tone becoming grave. "I did some digging on Vanessa Holt. She is more than his assistant. For the last 3 years, he has been paying her from that hidden account. Her paycheck is far too large for her job title." "No." "What does that mean?" Meredith questioned. "It means her job description involves much more than managing his schedule. I also uncovered an apartment lease under her name. It looks like she has been patiently waiting in the wings for him to end your marriage." A wave of nausea washed over Meredith. Her mind flashed to the countless evenings he said he was at the office. She recalled all the supposed work travel. She had given him her complete faith, and he had weaponized it against her. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking with a new resolve. "We prepare for war," Suzanne declared. "We gather every single piece of proof. And when the time is perfect, we will dismantle him legally." For the first time since that terrible night, Meredith experienced a feeling that was entirely new. A tiny spark of rage ignited deep within her. Her gaze shifted from the damning evidence on the table to her friend's determined face. "Show me the way forward." For the rest of the afternoon, they sorted through the paperwork and outlined their strategy. Suzanne broke down the legal process into manageable steps. She spoke in plain language about filing for divorce, tracing the hidden assets, and preparing for a custody battle. When they finally looked up, darkness had fallen outside. The twins were stirring, their cries signaling it was time for their evening meal. As Meredith tended to the babies, Suzanne prepared a simple dinner using supplies from the pantry. Hours passed, and with the children finally sleeping, a warm fire glowed in the hearth. The two friends sat in the peaceful dark. "I truly believed I would be heartbroken without him," Meredith confessed quietly. "Our home, our entire life. But I feel empty, not sad." "You are mourning the life you imagined," Suzanne answered gently. "Not the one you were actually living." Meredith nodded in agreement. "All the red flags I dismissed are coming back to me now. I think of every time I convinced myself I was overreacting or ungrateful." "That was his doing, not yours," Suzanne stated firmly. "The man was a master of deception." A moment of silence passed between them. Suzanne broke it. "He is definitely looking for you. You realize that? His mother has deep pockets and influential connections. I figured as much, Meredith whispered back. Are you afraid? Meredith took a moment to think. She pictured Garrett's face, with his cold, vacant stare. She remembered his mother, a woman who treated her with disdain and made her feel worthless. Yes, I am, she admitted, but returning to that life is a much greater fear. Good, Suzanne said. That is the feeling that will protect you. Outside the window, fresh snow started to drift down, wrapping the landscape in a quiet layer of white. Meredith's eyes fell on her children, resting peacefully in the crib Suzanne had assembled. For the first time, she allowed her mind to picture a life without Garrett Caldwell. The thought was terrifying, yet it also sparked a surge of excitement. It tasted like freedom. Into the quiet of the room, she breathed a promise. We are going to be okay. Just then, the peace was violently broken. The rumble of approaching engines grew into a roar. Beams of light cut through the night, dancing across the ceiling like prison searchlights. The fragile hope in Meredith's heart froze solid. They had found her. Her heart hammered in her chest. With trembling hands, she fumbled for her phone to call Suzanne. They're here, she choked out. Suzanne's reply, however, was steady and cool. I am aware, Meredith. I contacted someone as well. I have a contact in the state police who is arriving to check on you. Do not go outside. Moments later, a firm knock echoed from the front door. Meredith peered through a gap in the curtains. A uniformed state trooper was talking to two intimidating men beside a large black sport utility vehicle. The trooper was her protector. The men protested, but their authority was gone. Defeated, they retreated to their vehicle and left. The following morning, legal papers were delivered to Garrett. A court order froze his access to all funds and properties. In a single day, his entire empire crumbled. Meredith had done more than escape. She had won. Several months had passed. Meredith was in a sunny new home, a world away from her past. She looked on as her children played joyfully on the living room rug. At last, they were secure. At last, they had their freedom. It was in that moment she understood that she possessed the power all along to create a beautiful future from the ashes of her past. The phone chimed once, twice, a third time, then fell silent, transferring to voicemail. She redialed immediately. Her hands shook so violently, the device nearly fell from her hand. The call went unanswered again. Through the window, she saw figures approaching the cabin. Their flashlights sliced the night like razors. She counted 4 shapes. 2 were dressed in police uniforms, while the other 2 wore regular clothing. The sound of their footsteps crunching on the icy ground was terrifying. Each step drove another nail of fear into her. She estimated she had about 3 minutes. She scrambled toward the twins, who remained blissfully unaware in their cribs. Her mind raced, trying to solve a puzzle with no solution. How could she possibly get out? The little cabin had no back door and no other way to escape. Not a single window was large enough for her to slip through while holding 2 infants. Every single exit led straight into the hands of the men coming for her. She had to think. She had to find a way. But her thoughts spun in circles, chasing an answer that wasn't there. Hiding in the closet would only buy her a few seconds. If she refused to let them in, they would just break down the door. She could never fight off 4 men, 2 of whom were carrying weapons. Suddenly, a heavy pounding knock echoed through the cabin, as loud and shocking as a gunshot. Mrs. Caldwell, police. We need you to open the door. Meredith stood frozen in the middle of the room, clutching her babies tightly to her chest. Her breaths came in short, terrified gasps. Disturbed by the frantic rhythm of her heart, Emmett stirred against her. In her sleep, Nora let out a tiny cry. Meredith understood there was nowhere to go. She knew there was no place to hide. The only thing left to do was wait for what came next. Another knock followed, this one even more forceful than the last. Mrs. Caldwell, we know you are in there. Open this door immediately, or we will be forced to come in. Meredith moved toward the door with agonizing slowness, each footfall feeling like a step toward her own destruction. Meredith held both twins in the crook of one arm. Her other hand trembled so badly that just turning the simple doorknob seemed like an impossible challenge. When the cabin door finally groaned open, the first person to step inside was her mother-in-law, Eleanor Caldwell. She was dressed in a cream-colored cashmere coat, and her face wore an expression of cold victory. Her silver hair was perfectly arranged, and her makeup was immaculate, even in the middle of the night. She looked like a woman who had never known a single moment of hardship. Following her were two police officers with blank, professional expressions and a large man whom Meredith had never seen before. He was bald and had cold, empty eyes. He scanned the little cabin with the casual confidence of someone who was an expert at finding people who did not wish to be found. "Did you actually believe you could run from us?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with scorn. "In this tiny cabin, owned by the parents of some old friend from college? It took us a mere 3 days to find you, Meredith. Only 3 days. Did you honestly think you could outsmart our family?" Meredith pulled her babies in tighter, the warmth from their small bodies her only comfort. "How did you know I was here?" Eleanor offered a cruel smile that looked like the thin edge of a knife. "Money, my dear. Money can find anyone, and it can find anything. My son has already been granted emergency custody of the children. These officers are just here to make sure you follow the judge's order." "A judge's order? What are you talking about? I have not received any legal papers." One of the officers stepped forward and held out a folded piece of paper. His badge shone in the faint light. "Mrs. Caldwell, a judge signed an emergency custody order for your husband. It was granted based on concerns about your mental stability and the children's well-being. You have 72 hours to appear in a courtroom in Connecticut. My mental stability—" Meredith's voice shook and then cracked. "That is absurd. I am their mother. I have never once done anything that would harm them." "A mother who runs away in the middle of the night with her newborn babies?" Eleanor replied, her tone smooth as silk but sharp as a needle. "A mother who leaves her home without telling a soul, who takes her children to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, isolating them from everyone. That is not how a stable person behaves, Meredith. That is how a person having a serious mental breakdown acts." "I found out he was having an affair," Meredith yelled, fighting to control her voice as it rose with emotion. "He has been with another woman for months. He has been hiding our family's assets. His entire life is a lie. I left to protect myself and to protect my children." Eleanor did not even flinch. Her face remained a perfect mask of calm composure. "You see, officers? This is exactly what I was talking about. She is delusional and paranoid. She thinks there is a conspiracy against her. This is the exact behavior we described in the court filings." The large, bald man spoke then for the very first time. His voice was dull and robotic. "Mrs. Caldwell, my name is Frank Donovan. I am a private investigator hired by your husband. This does not need to be complicated. If you are cooperative and come back with us, we can let the courts handle the rest." Meredith's eyes darted from the investigator to the policemen, then finally landed back on Eleanor. She searched their faces, desperate to find even a small sign of kindness or understanding, but she found nothing. All she saw was cold, unshakable confidence. She saw the absolute certainty of people who knew they had already won before the fight even started. "Is there any other choice?" she whispered. "You have 72 hours to be in that Connecticut courtroom," the officer repeated. "If you do not show up, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. The children will remain with their father until the official hearing." In that single crushing moment, Meredith felt her whole world fall apart. Everything she had struggled for during the past week was gone. The safety she had found, the tiny spark of hope she had protected, the small chance of freedom. It all disappeared. Eleanor stepped closer. The smell of her expensive perfume was so thick it made it difficult to breathe. Her voice dropped to a poisonous whisper that was intended only for Meredith. If you return home quietly, Garrett might choose to be forgiving. But if you make a big deal out of this, if you drag our family's reputation into the dirt, I promise you this. I will personally make sure you never see these babies again. Do you understand what I am saying? Meredith looked down at Emmett and Nora, who were sleeping peacefully. They were so beautifully unaware of the chaos that was swirling around them. They had no idea their lives were being used as pawns by people who saw them as nothing more than property. For just a split second, she thought about fighting back. She imagined herself running out the door, screaming for help until someone, anyone, paid attention. But she knew it was hopeless. The Caldwell family's wealth could buy them absolutely anything, and Meredith had nothing at all. "Fine," she said, the one word feeling like she was swallowing shards of glass. "I will come back." A horrifying, victorious smile slowly crept across Eleanor's lips. "I knew you would see things our way. You have always been such a smart girl." A profound numbness washed over Meredith as an officer watched her pack a few things into a small bag. Donovan, the investigator, took her bags to their huge black car. Eleanor fussed over the babies, as if they were brand new trophies she had just won. But right then, Meredith made a silent promise to herself. This was not the end. She might have lost this battle, but the war was just beginning. She would burn their whole world to the ground to get her children back. The Greenwich family courthouse was a depressing gray building with tall windows that seemed to stare down on everyone with disapproval. On that freezing January morning, the American flags hanging outside were completely still. Inside, the sound of footsteps echoed on the marble floors, mixing with the quiet buzz of serious conversations. The air smelled of old paper and strong cleaning solutions. Meredith sat on a hard bench outside courtroom 3, nervously twisting her hands in her lap. Her lawyer and best friend Suzanne sat next to her, looking through a stack of legal papers. With every page she turned, her face grew more concerned. "This is completely rigged," Suzanne whispered. "The judge, Harrison Webb, has been friends with the Caldwells for 30 years. He was a guest at their wedding. He is supposed to remove himself from this case." "He will not do it," Meredith answered, her voice empty and flat. "They have thought of everything. I can still file a motion, asking him to step down. And he will simply deny the motion. Then we will appeal his denial." "With what money, Suzanne? I do not have even $1. Garrett froze all of my bank accounts and all of my credit cards." Suzanne looked at her friend with wide eyes. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Meredith saw real fear on her lawyer's face. It was the look of someone finally understanding just how powerful their enemies really were. At that moment, the large doors to the courtroom swung open. A bailiff called out their case number. Meredith felt her legs turn weak as she stood up and walked into the room where the rest of her life would be decided. The room was small and felt suffocating. Garrett was already sitting with his lawyer at the other table. His lawyer was a woman named Pamela Thornton, a person whose reputation for being merciless was a weapon all by itself. She was well known for taking apart her opponents in court with terrifying skill. Garrett would not even glance in Meredith's direction. He just looked straight ahead, sitting perfectly still, acting the part of a loving husband who had been betrayed. His mother, Eleanor, sat right behind him. She watched Meredith with the chilling satisfaction of a cat playing with a mouse, and beside Eleanor, dressed in a tasteful and professional suit, was Vanessa Holt. Seeing her there almost made Meredith's legs give out from under her. It was unbelievable. The other woman was right there in the courtroom, watching Meredith fight for her own children. She wore the affair with Garrett like a badge of honor. A voice called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harrison Webb." The judge walked in, an older man with white hair and glasses rimmed with steel. His face showed he had made up his mind long before he sat down. He gave a quick, knowing nod to Pamela Thornton. Then his eyes flickered over to Meredith for just a second. He said, "We are here today to review the emergency custody motion filed by Mr. Garrett Caldwell for his two children, Emmett and Nora Caldwell. Miss Thornton, you may begin." Pamela stood, her voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, my client is deeply worried about his children's well-being. On December 25th, his wife, Meredith Caldwell, abandoned the family home in the middle of the night. She took the children to a location she did not disclose and did not try to contact anyone. A scream was rising inside Meredith's chest. She wanted to jump up and expose the cheating, the hidden bank accounts, and every single lie. But her lawyer, Suzanne, put a firm hand on her arm, a silent order to stay in her seat. Pamela continued, "We have also obtained a psychiatric evaluation." Pamela lifted a file folder as she spoke. "It indicates that Mrs. Caldwell might be suffering from postpartum psychosis. The doctor who evaluated her, Dr. Robert Matthews, is ready to testify. He will confirm that her recent actions are consistent with delusional thinking and that she could be a danger to her children." Meredith leaned over to Suzanne and whispered with urgency, "I have never even met a doctor with that name." "I know," Suzanne whispered back. "We are going to fight this." But when Suzanne rose to object, Judge Webb just waved his hand dismissively and shut her down. He said, "The evaluation was ordered out of Mr. Caldwell's deep concern for his children's safety." The next hour was a complete nightmare, constructed from twisted truths and outright lies. Vanessa took the witness stand, introducing herself as Mr. Caldwell's executive assistant. With tears forming in her eyes, she explained how Meredith's behavior had become stranger and stranger over the last year. "She seemed so paranoid," Vanessa said, her voice heavy with fake worry. "She would accuse Mr. Caldwell of the most incredible things. I even saw her throw tantrums at company events." Meredith could only stare at the woman who was having an affair with her husband. This woman was now lying under oath to help take Meredith's children away, and a cold fear washed over Meredith. When her lawyer, Suzanne, attempted to show proof of the affair, Judge Webb stopped her. He announced, "This is a custody hearing, Mrs. Brennan, not a divorce court. Mr. Caldwell's personal life does not affect the children's welfare." Suzanne argued back, "Your Honor, his extreme dishonesty says everything about his character and his ability to be a good father." The judge's reply was immediate. "Objection sustained. Continue with your case." But there was nothing else to continue with. Every single piece of evidence Meredith had carefully collected was either thrown out or completely disregarded. Every point Suzanne tried to make was instantly rejected. It was terribly clear that the outcome had been determined before they even came to court. The judge read his decision with a cold and practiced cruelty. "Based on the testimony and evidence provided," Judge Webb stated, "I am giving temporary sole custody of the children to their father, Mr. Garrett Caldwell. Mrs. Caldwell will have supervised visits twice a week until a full custody hearing is held." "No!" Meredith gasped, getting to her feet. "No, you can't do this. He's lying. All of them are lying." The judge's voice was sharp. "Mrs. Caldwell, get a hold of yourself or I will have you escorted out of my courtroom." "Please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Please do not take my children. They are my babies. I am their mother." But her pleas were pointless. Two court officers were already walking toward her. Garrett was on his feet, and his mother, Eleanor, was already picking up the twins, who were still in their car seats. Meredith watched, in pure horror, as the people who ruined her life took her children from the room. Her daughter, Nora, looked back over Eleanor's shoulder. Her little face was wrinkled in confusion as she reached her tiny hand out toward her mommy. Meredith fell against Suzanne, a broken, painful cry tearing out of her throat. She was completely defeated. They had taken away everything she held dear, and there was nothing she could do to stop them. The motel room smelled of old cigarette smoke and sadness. The wallpaper was peeling at the edges like old, dry skin. The floor was a patchwork of stains that Meredith did her best not to look at. On the ceiling, a big brown watermark spread out like a map to nowhere. But the room was only $39 a night, and she only had $847 left to her name. It had been 3 weeks since that horrible day in court. 3 weeks of seeing her kids in cold, plain rooms under the buzz of fluorescent lighting. For 2 hours at a time, she would sit in a hard plastic chair, holding her babies while a monitor assigned by the court wrote down her every single move. She had gotten through 3 terrible weeks in motels that only took cash and did not ask for any ID. For 3 weeks, she lived on snacks from gas stations and burnt-tasting coffee from vending machines. She desperately searched for a way forward, but every option she thought of led to a dead end. Garrett's lawyers had been merciless and quick. They had frozen their shared bank accounts, saying she was a flight risk who might take all their money. They got a restraining order that kept her out of her own house. They claimed the house was a shared asset and was now part of the divorce proceedings. They even used her desperate escape with the children against her, saying that by crossing state lines, she proved she was not a stable parent. They had taken her life apart, one piece at a time, until there was nothing left. And that very day, she had gotten the most devastating news yet. Meredith sat on the lumpy bed, looking at the legal papers Suzanne had emailed her earlier. The torn envelope was on the nightstand. The pages were laid out on the worn bedspread like clues at a terrible crime scene. The one person who could have saved her, Garrett's old secretary Tina Marshall, had sided with them. She had completely changed her story in a new legal statement. In this new account, she said Meredith had tried to bribe her to lie about Mr. Caldwell. The document was official, and it was the final nail in the coffin for their case. "He bought her," Suzanne had said on the phone, her voice empty. "I do not know how much it cost him, but it was enough. She was our only real hope of showing him for the monster he is." Meredith asked, "What about the federal investigation?" "It is not going anywhere," Suzanne said. "Judge Webb is staying on the case, and our complaint against him is being ignored. Meredith, he has friends in powerful positions. I have never encountered anything like this." "So what am I supposed to do now?" Meredith asked. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. "I do not know," Suzanne finally said. "I have no more options. I am so very sorry." After the call ended, Meredith just sat in the quiet for a very long time. Outside her window, the world kept moving as if her own had not just been destroyed. Cars drove fast on the highway, their headlights cutting through the evening darkness. Across the road, a diner's neon sign blinked on. It promised fresh coffee and pie. In a different world, people were going about their regular lives. They were concerned with ordinary problems. They were hugging their children without a stranger watching and taking notes. She grabbed her phone and opened a news application, her thumb scrolling past headlines that she did not even see. But then, an article at the top of the page made her stomach drop. The headline said, "Caldwell Capital announces record-breaking sales and plans for expansion." The article had a picture of Garrett at a press conference. He was at a podium with his company logo, looking strong, wealthy, and completely untouched by the pain he had caused. His suit fit him perfectly. His smile was big and sure of itself. He looked like a man who had never had a single bad day in his life, and standing right next to him was Vanessa. Her hand was placed on a small baby bump, just noticeable under her expensive dress. She had the happy glow of a mother-to-be. It was the same glow Meredith used to have, before her whole world was torn to shreds. The caption under the picture said, Caldwell with fiancée Vanessa Holt, who are expecting their first child. Meredith's eyes were fixed on those words. Expecting their first child. Their first child. It was as if her own children, Emmett and Nora, had been completely wiped away. It was as if they were just a small detail in Garrett's life, instead of being the very center of hers. She imagined her babies sleeping at Eleanor's house. Nannies were feeding them their bottles. Strangers were rocking them to sleep. She thought about the 2 hours a week she was allowed to be with them, always watched, always judged. It was never close to enough. For just a second, she thought about just giving up. Her phone suddenly vibrated, pulling her out of her dark thoughts. The call was from a number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. What did it matter? It was likely more bad news. Another expert telling her it was all hopeless. Another reminder that men like Garrett always get what they want. She felt like just another piece on his chessboard. But for a reason she could not explain, she found herself sliding her thumb across the screen to answer the call. "Am I speaking with Meredith Caldwell?" a woman's voice asked. The voice was cautious and strange, and it had a slight echo, as if she were calling from a big, empty room. "Who is calling?" Meredith replied. "My name is not important right now," the woman said, "but I have some information that I believe you will find very interesting. Listen, if you are another reporter trying to get a story, I am not interested. I have said all I am going to say." "I am not a reporter, Mrs. Caldwell," the woman answered. "I am someone who has been in the exact same position you are in right now. I am a person who survived Garrett Caldwell." Meredith felt all the air rush out of her lungs. She was gripping her phone so hard that her knuckles had turned completely white. "What are you trying to say?" she whispered into the phone. There was a brief silence on the other end. When the woman finally spoke again, her voice was much softer, and it was filled with the pain of old wounds. "You should check your email. I have sent you something that is going to change your entire situation. But you must be incredibly careful. He has people watching and listening everywhere. He always does." "How did you get my phone number? Who are you?" Meredith pushed for an answer. "I am someone he was not able to completely destroy," the woman said. "Look at the email. After you read it, you can call me back." Then, the line went dead. Meredith sat there completely motionless, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. Her hands would not stop shaking as she opened up her email. There was a new message waiting for her at the very top of her inbox. The email did not have a subject, and there was no text in the body. It contained just a single file attachment, with one sentence written underneath it. The sentence said, "He did this exact same thing to me. You are not going crazy, and you are not alone." With a trembling finger, she tapped on the screen to open the attachment. The first thing that appeared was a medical record from 4 years ago. It was an order to have a woman named Colleen Mercer committed to a mental health facility. The person who had her sent there was her husband, Garrett Mercer. He had claimed that she was severely depressed and imagining things that were not there. It was a commitment against her will. Meredith felt like her heart had stopped beating. Garrett had been married before. Eleanor had mentioned that to her one time. Eleanor had brought it up just once, many years ago, during a quiet dinner with the family. She had told her about a very short marriage that came to an end when his first wife passed away in a terrible car accident. The entire situation was just so tragic, Eleanor had said at the time. But some people just are not strong enough to handle the pressures of this life. But the real truth was that Colleen Mercer had not died in a car accident at all. The documents in front of her proved that her husband had her locked away in a psychiatric hospital. She was kept there for 6 months without her consent. They forced her to take medication and cut her off completely from everyone she had ever loved. The only way she was released was after she signed a huge stack of legal documents. In those documents, she agreed to give up all her marital property and made a promise to never try to contact Garrett or his family again. The very second that she signed those documents, it was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth. Meredith scrolled through the rest of the files, and she felt more and more sick with every page she looked at. She saw hospital records that detailed medical treatments Colleen had never agreed to. She discovered statements from bank accounts he had kept secret. There were legal documents that a judge had ordered to be sealed and kept private from the public forever. And after that, she discovered a letter that Colleen had written to her sister. It was a digital copy of a message that she was never able to send. The letter read, "He made every single person believe that I was insane. He paid off doctors to support his lies, found judges that owed him favors, and hired lawyers that would do anything for a paycheck. I had no idea what was really happening until it was far too late. He had taken away everything that belonged to me. He stole my money, my good name, my freedom, and even my own sense of self. If you are reading this letter, it means I finally discovered a way to get away. I am pleading with you, please do not allow him to do this to another person." Meredith's attention was drawn to the date on the documents. They were from 4 years in the past. Colleen Mercer had escaped from Garrett Caldwell. She had made it out alive. She had built a completely new life from the ashes of the one he had burned to the ground. And if Colleen had found a way to do that, Meredith knew that she could find a way too. She grabbed her phone and dialed the unknown number. A woman picked up on the very first ring. "I am ready to hear what you have to say," Meredith said. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, her voice sounded strong and sure. "Please tell me everything that happened to you," Meredith said. The woman on the other end of the line was now calling herself Catherine. She had picked that name for herself when she started her new life. She had left the name, Colleen Mercer, far behind her, along with all the other things that her ex-husband, Garrett, had destroyed. She told Meredith that she was living a very quiet life now, hiding out in a small town in Oregon where no one knew about her past. It had taken her 4 entire years to piece her life back together, to feel safe enough to ever trust anyone again, and to finally be free from the feeling that she was always in danger. But she had never once forgotten what Garrett had done to her. When she happened to see a news report about his new wife running away with their children, she knew that she could not hide anymore. "I have spent years gathering evidence against him," Catherine said, and her voice was filled with a quiet strength. "I have proof of all of it, but I have always been too scared to go to the police on my own." Meredith then asked the single most important question on her mind. "So what made you decide to call me now?" Catherine's answer was direct and powerful. "Because you were the very first woman who actually fought back against him. All the other women who came before you simply vanished. I was hoping that if we joined forces, we could finally put a stop to him for good." That night, they spent 3 whole hours talking on the phone. Catherine laid out all of the incredible evidence she had been able to collect. She explained how Garrett always used the same pattern of destruction, and how he used his connections with powerful people to keep himself safe. Then she told Meredith something that made her blood turn to ice. "I was not his first wife," Catherine confessed. "There was another woman whose name was Patricia. After they had been married for 2 years, he had her committed. And even before Patricia, there was a young woman he dated in college. She suddenly quit school and moved far away and never explained to anyone why she left." Meredith felt a sick feeling growing in the pit of her stomach. "How many women has he done this to?" Catherine was quiet for a moment. "The ones I have proof of? There are at least 4 of them. But I am positive that there are others," she said. A feeling of nausea washed over Meredith. For so many years, so many women had been hurt, while Garrett continued to live his life without any consequences. His wealth had built a shield around him that let him be as cruel as he wanted. "So what is our next step?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are going to the only person who has been trying to take him down for years." 2 days after that phone call, Meredith found herself sitting in a plain government office in Hartford. She was there for a meeting with a woman named Patricia Cole, an agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, whose sharp, weary eyes seemed to have seen it all. Agent Cole looked Meredith right in the eye and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I have dedicated the last 6 years of my life trying to build a solid case against your husband. I have looked into him for everything from financial crimes and not paying his taxes to interfering with justice, but every single time I think I am getting close, something goes wrong. My key witnesses suddenly go missing, or they completely change their stories. Important evidence just seems to disappear, and for some reason the judges always seem to make decisions that help him." Meredith had to be certain. She asked, "So you have no question in your mind that he is a criminal?" The agent's response was serious. "I have no question that he is an extremely dangerous man with very powerful friends." "Then why has he never been put in jail?" Agent Cole leaned in a little closer. "Because there is a huge difference between knowing something is true and being able to prove that it is true in a court of law. To be able to do that, I need people who are willing to come forward and tell their story. And up until now, nobody has been brave enough to do that," Meredith said, finishing the agent's sentence for her. She thought about her two wonderful children, Emmett and Nora, and the agonizing 2 hours a week she was permitted to see them. She thought about Eleanor, her mother-in-law, and the smug, triumphant look that was always on her face. She thought about her husband's new girlfriend, Vanessa. With her hand placed on her pregnant stomach, a completely new kind of fire started to burn deep inside of Meredith. "I am done being afraid," she declared, and her voice was filled with a power she had not felt in years. For the following 3 weeks, all of them worked around the clock to put their case together. Agent Cole and Catherine created a timeline of a decade's worth of illegal activities. Meredith even consented to wear a secret recording device during her visits with the children, capturing conversations that would show the world who Garrett really was. The strategy they created was both brilliant and simple. Meredith would be the one to reach out to Garrett. She would act as if she was completely defeated and ask for a private meeting to talk about giving up. She was certain that his massive ego would not allow him to pass up an opportunity to watch her admit that he had won. He would show up expecting to see a broken woman who was begging for him to take her back. But he was not going to find a broken woman waiting for him. He was about to walk straight into a trap that had been perfectly set. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in a hotel suite in Stamford. Meredith had picked the room herself, making sure that the sound quality was excellent and that there were plenty of places to hide small cameras. She got there early. Her heart was racing in her chest, but her mind was completely clear and ready. In the hotel room next door, Agent Cole and her team listened intently to every sound. When Garrett entered the suite, he was exactly as Meredith remembered. He was dressed impeccably, and he carried himself with an air of absolute certainty, like a man who had never known defeat. "You asked to see me," he said, stating a fact, not asking a question. He settled into a large armchair, as comfortable as someone who had won every fight he had ever been in. "So, talk." Meredith sat on the sofa opposite him. She pressed her hands together in her lap, trying to hide that they were trembling. "I want my children back," she said, her voice deliberately small and fragile. "I miss them so much." A cold, cruel smile spread across his lips. "Then it is time to end this nonsense. Come home and begin remembering your place." "My place?" she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. He let out a quiet, condescending laugh. That smile once made her feel like the most fortunate woman in the world. Now Meredith realized it was merely the camouflage of a predator. "You were always an accessory," he said, his tone chillingly calm. "A beautiful object on my arm, a suitable mother for my children, and a wife who understood her role. But you became greedy, Mary. You started wanting things you never earned, like respect or a voice. And I will never, ever give away my power." Meredith could feel the small microphone taped to her skin, capturing every single hateful word he uttered. "And what about Colleen?" she asked softly. "Did she want power too?" In an instant, his entire demeanor shifted. The confident smirk vanished. Something icy and frightening replaced it. "How do you know that name?" he hissed. "I know all about her, Garrett. I know what you did to her." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Colleen was weak, just like you are. She refused to accept her place in the world, so I had to get rid of her. If you continue to challenge me, I promise you will disappear in the very same way." "Is that a threat?" she asked. "That is a statement of fact," he replied. Meredith gave a slow, deliberate nod. She stared directly at the large mirror on the opposite wall, fully aware a camera was concealed behind it. "I believe that is everything we will need," she said, her voice suddenly strong and clear. At that very moment, the door to the hotel suite burst open. The room was suddenly swarming with federal agents. For the first time in his privileged life, Garrett Caldwell looked utterly terrified. His arrest quickly became the biggest news story in the nation. Television networks played the secret recording on a loop. Everyone watched Garrett being escorted from the Stamford Hotel in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and fury. The footage was inescapable. It was analyzed on morning news programs and shared millions of times across the internet. Headlines blazed from every screen. Billionaire financier arrested by federal agents, the humiliating fall of a Wall Street titan, and more women come forward in Caldwell scandal. The official list of charges filed against him was extensive and severe. It included everything from financial fraud and tax evasion to conspiracy to commit human rights violations. The entire scandal erupted after Catherine courageously shared her experience. Following her lead, Patricia and two other women whom Meredith had never met also spoke out. This was about more than just one man's monstrous actions. It evolved into a moment of reckoning for the whole country. Agent Cole cautioned Meredith that the legal battle ahead would be difficult. She explained that Garrett's high-priced lawyers would use every dirty tactic imaginable. However, a form of swift justice came long before a trial could even start. Just 3 days following Garrett's arrest, his girlfriend Vanessa Holt was apprehended at an airport. She was attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. She was carrying $200,000 in jewelry and had a handbag stuffed with cash. She was arrested for possession of stolen goods. She was then paraded through the busy airport wearing the exact same designer shoes she had flaunted at the custody hearing. Her booking photo, showing mascara streaks on her tear-filled face and her eyes wide with panic, was published right beside Garrett's. And what about the pregnancy she had so viciously used against Meredith? It was a complete lie. Medical records confirmed Vanessa had fabricated the entire story to ensnare a rich man who was now a national disgrace. Meanwhile, Eleanor Caldwell barricaded herself inside her massive mansion, declining to speak with the media or anyone else. Her once full social calendar was now completely bare. The influential friends who had previously begged for invitations to her dinner parties suddenly stopped returning her calls. The Caldwell name, once a symbol of power and prestige, was now just a joke and a cautionary tale. For Meredith, though, there was only one victory that truly counted. It arrived 6 weeks later, inside a courtroom. The room felt worlds away from the one where she had lost everything. A new judge, a woman named Patricia Winters, presided over the hearing. She was known for being both tough and fair. She reviewed all the new evidence with great care. She listened to the compelling testimony from Agent Cole, Catherine, and the other women. She viewed the video from the hidden hotel camera, which clearly showed Garrett threatening Meredith's life. After considering everything, she delivered her final ruling. This court grants full and sole custody of the children, Emmett and Nora Caldwell, to their mother, Meredith Caldwell. Mr. Garrett Caldwell is denied all visitation and communication pending the outcome of his criminal trial. Furthermore, This court orders the immediate release of all frozen marital assets and awards financial compensation for the emotional distress inflicted upon the mother. The words felt like they were from a wonderful dream. Full custody, her assets returned, financial damages. She had done it. She had actually won. Her attorney, Suzanne, gripped her hand so tightly it was almost painful. Meredith could hear the low murmur of voices in the courtroom behind her, but she ignored them. Her gaze was locked on the courtroom door. A court officer was guiding two small children in matching sweaters through the doorway. Emmett spotted her first. A brilliant, joyful smile spread across his face. He began to squirm in the officer's grasp, stretching his little arms out toward her. "Mama!" he shouted at the top of his lungs. "Mama!" It was the very first word he had ever spoken. He chanted it over and over like a happy little melody. "Mama, mama, mama!" In a blur, Meredith was across the room. She swept both of her children into a fierce embrace as a powerful sob of relief shook her entire frame. Nora buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her tiny fingers tangling in her hair. "I am here," Meredith whispered to them, her own tears of joy streaming down her face. "I am here, my loves, and I promise I will never, ever let you go again." The following months were not without challenges, as healing is a long process. Meredith and her children relocated to a small, peaceful town on the Maine coast. It was a place far removed from the painful memories of Greenwich. She bought a charming little house with a beautiful view of the ocean. It was significantly smaller than the mansion she had fled, but this home was all hers. She also returned to her career, using her accounting expertise to help other women secure their finances during their own difficult divorces. Her new life was wonderfully simple. The income she made was just a tiny fraction of the fortune Garrett's firm generated, but her work now had profound meaning. Her twins, Emmett and Nora, started to flourish as all children should. They took their first steps together on a sandy beach at sunset. They spoke their first complete sentences to each other while sitting among moving boxes in their new house. This was a home where they learned to laugh and cry and feel completely secure. It was a home where voices were never raised, doors were never slammed, and their mother no longer had to cry in secret. But Meredith still had nightmares sometimes. She always checked the locks 3 times before going to sleep. And she still felt a jolt of panic if a man walked past wearing expensive cologne. Once in a while, she would see a face in a crowd that resembled Garrett. But she was growing stronger. The road to recovery was slow and imperfect, but she was moving forward on it every single day. One beautiful afternoon in early spring, she sat on her porch, watching Emmett and Nora chase seagulls along the shore. A pickup truck pulled into her driveway, and a man with a toolbox stepped out. His name was Owen Hartley. He was a local carpenter and a widower. He had kind eyes and hands that were calloused from years of honest work. He also had a young daughter named Sophie, who was the same age as her twins. He was there to repair a wobbly porch railing that had been loose since she arrived. Owen did not probe into her past. He did not ask for any stories or details. He simply fixed the railing and then spent an entire hour playing tag with her children in the sand. Before he drove away, he asked if he might stop by again sometime. "I would like that very much," Meredith replied, and the words felt absolutely right in her heart. Just then, her phone vibrated with a news alert. She glanced at the headline. It read, "Garrett Caldwell, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison." She felt nothing at all. Meredith put her phone down and turned her attention back to her children, to the ocean, and to the kind man who was smiling at her as he put his tools away. The thought of him still echoed in her mind. He had tried to take it all. Garrett had stolen her sense of trust and made her feel unsafe. He had poisoned her belief that there was any goodness left in the world, but he could not have her children, and her spirit, her unbreakable spirit, was something he could never even touch. From his truck, Owen gave a final wave. His little daughter, Sophie, pressed her face against the window, her small hand flapping a goodbye to the twins. At that very moment, Emmett came running along the sandy trail, his sneakers sending up little clouds of dust. "Mommy!" he yelled, his voice overflowing with excitement. "Mommy, you have to come see what I discovered." He held up a simple seashell, like it was the most valuable jewel in the world, his face shining with pure happiness. A deep calm settled over Meredith right then. It was not a loud triumph, just a quiet, powerful sense of stillness. She was finally okay. She pulled her son close and kissed his cheek, tasting the sand and the sun. "Oh, my sweet boy, it is absolutely perfect," she whispered into his hair. "Let's walk down to the water's edge and see what other treasures we can find." They held hands and made their way toward the gentle waves. The tide was slowly rising, clearing away old footprints. With each soft rush of water, their future spread out before them, as big and full of possibility as the ocean itself. And for the first time in a very long time, Meredith Calwell was not scared of what was coming next.